3 sessions. I want to start by thanking Brett Steele for making these talks possible. And I just want to remind people the information for the other 2 on the AA website, and all the consortium students have it on email. And they are a fortnight from now, followed by another fortnight. So they're on the 11th and the 28th of February. On the 11th, it'll be Hito Stael, who's shown at the Chisenhale recently, and at a number of other places in England. And on the 28th, it'll be your own Jeff Kipnis talking to Tobias Freiberger. Okay, I'm going to keep everything I say to a minimum as usual. And I will go ahead and say how pleased I am that Peter Welz is going to talk to us today. I'll say something about him simply by giving you 4 of his descriptive titles, which I found on the web. The first, video, sculpture, architectural device, rotating figure inscribing a circle, 6-channel video projection. The second, architectural device for a Forsythe movement. The third, whenever, on, know-how, on. Air drawing, 5-channel video installation. And the last, retranslation, final unfinished portrait, brackets Francis Bacon, figure inscribing figure. Here, channel video installation, drawing. Peter's collaboration with William Forsythe is one manifestation of his interest in the complex relations between body architecture and text, turning space into movement and movement into space. This interest takes a different form in his work on Casa Malaparte in Capri, where a dancer walks backwards, if I'm right, down that amazing flight of outdoor steps you've all probably seen. Sculpture is a term used in relation to both these works. Peter himself uses it when he describes Mies van der Rohe's Barcelona Pavilion as a sculptural device for video projections from Casa Malaparte. Peter will talk about both these projects, I believe, this evening, and I look forward to hearing how he thinks the coming together of performance, photography, video, drawing, text, sculpture, and architecture. And then just to say, he's not quite one of our own, but he did do his fine art degree in Dublin and his MA at Chelsea College of Fine Art and Design. Please welcome Peter Welz.
Hello, everybody. Okay, what I'm going to do is, instead of doing too much talking, and from my experience from joining lectures, I think I'm going to show you many, many works. Right, so it's more visual information than just talking about it. So my first piece I've done that you can see here, which is set up in Chicago at the Renaissance Society, is with choreographer William Forsythe. I decided to include this work because when we started to collaborate, I became aware how many layers choreography and movement actually generates. It's really, really, really fascinating. This kind of room inscription and how they derive in that kind of language of movement. So as you can read down here, it says whenever on, know how on. It's deriving from Samuel Beckett. And that's basically the title of the piece, and I asked Forsythe to inscribe the title into space. So I filmed him, like you can see here, from above, the front, the side, 3-dimensional. I had a hand camera facing towards him and one facing into the space. So instead of writing a W, for instance, so he's inscribing with his whole body the title into space. And I want to give you a very brief idea how this looks like by this CD-ROM that you actually can buy online, Amazon.com.
The point line that was inside your body and sometimes in space, yeah, can also be produced by extruding a line from a point, like I'm doing right now. And this line, yeah, an extruded line can be collapsed and can come not only out to body parts, but also be extruded from the floor. A line on the floor, yeah, when extruded, can produce the idea of a plane. Yeah? And this plane, in turn, can be flattened and or rotated. Yeah? That's rotated in turn, sorry. Rotated. Ideas about extrusion and extension do not exist usually in such rarefied circumstances and do not appear so simply. They are part of a more complex series of movements. And what you must get used to doing is to the feeling of the coordination of extending and extruding, yeah, lines and planes until you begin to feel this move through your whole body, and you can begin to extend and extrude until the motions become very complex and the relationships stay very clear and how these lines and planes are forming themselves, but it's just a feeling for this kind of line and plane making. And it goes back down E, boom, sorry, boom, boom.
And one last one. Where is it? Floor. Reorganizing.
Within the model, it's very easy to understand reorientation. If you imagine this surface was attached to this knee, yeah? And if I'm like this, and this is the relationship between my right knee and my hands, if I go like this, where should my hands be? There. This is called reorientation. I have moved the floor, in other words, in front of me, because the knee was the priority for organization, and that means that my hands, which are the secondary priority, have now shifted to a new position, a new orientation, which is the same as it was in relationship to the floor. In other words, parallel to the floor, yeah? And now, since the knee was the priority and the floor is here in front of us, the arms are still parallel to the floor.
The reason why I want to show you this is kind of how the body's basically orientated in space and how they can shift the whole orientation upside down. It's also called real-time choreography, where they start off with a point and they construct. It's like a huge drawing, for instance, in space that you don't see per se. But this whole construction, how the body is aligning and where this movement is deriving from, I thought was extraordinary, and to really examine this. That's the reason why this work came out, whenever on know how on. And I set it up like kind of a constructivist drawing, so you, the viewer, move through the movement, and you have to orientate yourself within the movement, right? So these are tables that we kind of put upwards. So I could, as you can see here, so I could place the camera here, and the one from the front, but it's like a setup for the video, but I like it as an architectural device. I really regard this as a sculpture. Same here. Then I projected the movement onto paper, and I would trace the movement of his hand. So me as an artist, I was told what to draw. Usually it's the other way around. And I ended up with these kind of really organic drawings. Another study. Same here, that's the shot from above. That's interesting because this is a still from Edward Muybridge, hand drawing a circle. And choreography actually means drawing a circle. And there's this myth like that. An artist has been asked to prove his skills as an artist, so he was asked to draw a perfect circle, which is impossible. And I find it interesting that Muybridge actually undertook that experiment, the series, to draw a hand drawing a circle. And you see it from the front and the side with a movement of Forsythe. Again here, it's the shot from the side, and you can see there's already something going on. Oops, you can't really see, sorry. But here I took an extract of the drawing, and I lined it with fake concrete walls. So I made a series of fake concrete walls. It's a curved wall, a bended one, and this is bended like for 180 degrees, so they're all useless walls, but fake concrete walls aligning to the drawing. And then I made this kind of model, small scale, and I project the movement back onto it. So the movement was generating an architecture, and I project the movement back onto it. And then we built it in large, actually, in New York. I mean, it was huge. It's a construction of fake concrete walls. That's the study I included within the construction. At the time when I did the work, I happened to be in Dublin, in Ireland, at the Irish Museum of Modern Art. And in Dublin I came across the unfinished portrait by Francis Bacon at the Ulane Gallery. So Francis Bacon, he died in '92 in Madrid from a heart attack, I think. And he left his studio in Kensington like this heap of rubbish. And it's just a sketch, it's like a drawing on the canvas, and he did that on purpose so he couldn't do any correction. So he painted on the back of the canvas, the raw canvas, not the primed side. And they found this piece, and it's called Unfinished Portrait. Here you can see it better. It's quite large. I think it's almost 2 meters by, it's a very large painting, so it's quite a physical act as well to kind of draw this. So here you see George Dyer. And if you look carefully here, the red line out, oops, where is it? The red line out here, this is like the head and the shoulder. There's like a suggestion of a second figure actually within the painting. So when I saw this, because I made those kind of studies, there's quite a similarity. So after I did the first piece with Forsythe, the room inscription, I said, Bill, I'm sorry, we have to reverse the piece conceptually, and I want you to translate the unfinished portrait by Francis Bacon. So that's what he did. And this is how it looked like. That's in Paris at the Louvre. So we actually got on loan the unfinished portrait. And here you see the sequence shot from the side. And again, above and from the front. So I split the figure like as a 3-dimensional portrait within the space. And interestingly enough, this is where you would usually find the Roman sculptures. And sculpture always would only suggest movement. But with Forsythe, he was a figure inscribing a figure in the space, in that context. And that basically blew my mind, because I never thought I would get there as a sculptor. Right. But it's also showing this experiment that I never worked like in a straightforward kind of media. I actually detest video. I don't have a video camera. I don't want it. So it's evolving slowly but surely, and all different layers, they, take you like into different routes and ideas. What I can try is actually, I prepared this. Maybe I don't know whether there's any sound. merge the Bacon and Forsythe. That's normally not the case, right? But I wanted that people can see kind of in his kind of language what he would do and how he would translate that. Right. And these are studies, right? Kind of the blurred, trying to reach into the head. And then I made this study, and here you see just vaguely, again, the second red figure from the unfinished portrait, where I aligned the fake concrete walls. So my idea is that the figure could also kind of create this kind of, I don't know, figure as architecture, something like that. And I'm pretty sure you probably came across this house here, Casa Malaparte. And I found out that Crusoe Malaparte, who's a poet, writer, who built the house, he is the architect of the house. It's always supposed to be Adalberto Libera, but he only started, they fell out, and he never finished the building per se. It was like a long process. But Malaparte stated himself, and it's very, very important, he said, whatever I've written wouldn't be as strong as the house. The house is the main work I've ever done, and it's a portrait of myself. So it's the second portrait that I'm kind of looking at. It's the house. So it was Francis Bacon as the first portrait, the unfinished portrait. And here we have Malaparte, the architecture. And of course, if you look at the curved wall, which is on top of the roof, I mean, it's so much alike than, you know, the fake concrete walls which I've made. So there were different aspects I was so struck by. So I got in touch with the owners. It's the grandnephew, it's Niccolo Rossitani and his wife Alessia. And they're very, 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 very strict. You cannot just access the house. And so it took me about 3 years to meet them, and finally I was able to go to Capri and actually stay at the house for 5 days. I wasn't allowed to take any photographs, so all the images I'm going to show you now are actually from the web, right? I wasn't allowed to take any photographs. I was only doing drawings and I was reading, and then I really got to understand that from a biographic terms, like of Malaparte, he was imprisoned at some point. He was longing for that very prison again. It looks very romantic, and that landscape, I mean, the first time you get there, it's absolutely stunning. But the longer you stay, you really become aware that that was an escape into a prison, that it really requires a lot of discipline to stay there and bear the nothingness and really work and write. So that was the very purpose why he also built the house. Can you see this? This is Malaparte himself. I think he was quite a freak. That's him with his bicycle on the rooftop of the house, kind of wearing gloves, right? I mean, it was quite intense. But that's all well documented. I mean, if you do research on him, you will come all across that, but I don't want to get into that. So that's a postcard, a really early postcard, and here he scratched, or a photograph, he scratched kind of the building, actually, where it's sited on the rock, onto the photograph. There you see another one, and you get an idea how steep those rocks are. You only can access the house by boat, or you have to walk there, which is, you know, like an hour's walk. So you're really, really isolated. This, I mean, the house was built from 1938 till 41, I think. So this is a photograph around 1940, and the curved wall you can see here has a steep cut at the far end. The windows are already there, and everything is set up. Another shot. And here it's almost towards completion. And I think a lot of people know this photograph. That's I found in the net. It's the salone, as they say in Italy. And you find those huge framed windows. There's a chimney, and you also had all the furniture kind of made. Here you see the chimney again. It's when you go through this door here, this is kind of where you, and there's all these tiles, as you can see, had them manufactured especially. This is the room of the favorita, the ladies' room, and that was his bedroom. And there was the bathroom and the chimney again of the favorita that you can see here, the bathroom. And that was his study, right? So the window here was looking out on the ocean, the front of the house, and this window is facing the side. So when you leave the salone, you come down the staircase like here. And in the back, this is a very dark kind of wooden space, quite surprisingly, and you have the kitchen down here. And if you walk in onto the right, you would have guest rooms as well. So it's quite a large house, actually. And here you see those stairs, how difficult it is to access. So that was the state how the house was in when it was used by a French filmmaker called Jean-Luc Godard. And I don't know whether you've seen this film, Le Mépris, The Contempt. I think the actual duration where the house is shown is only 1/3 of the whole film. So it's a very short sequence, but for some reason everybody is so struck by it, and it has Brigitte Bardot and Michel Piccoli in it, but everybody remembers the house for some reason of that very movie. So here you have Brigitte Bardot and Michel Piccoli on the staircase. And I started as well to make studies only out of still photographs. And what I was interested is actually this English notion of like there's someone ascending or descending a staircase, so you can walk up or walk down. As again you would find with Edward Muybridge, and this is a study kind of the camera movement as well. But then there were like always these actors in the middle of it, and I got quite annoyed of it, so I erased them, right? So I could only look at the architecture. So I erased Michel Piccoli and I erased Brigitte Bardot, no interest, like here, and I turned it on its side. So this is to me like a really kind of painting-like quality, right? So I decided to make a blurred video, a video which is totally out of focus. That was one part of the portrait. The second part, of course, were the windows. I measured the frames. It's kind of horse chestnut wood, and they're very large. And I find it an interesting aspect, those windows, because it's this mixture between kind of an enclosure, but as well like an exclosure of the nature, right? That's the second window. And what you don't see here, right, is Bill Gates' yacht. It's a nightmare. There's all these boats around. When we were filming, we were so annoyed about these bloody tourist boats. They just come around the corner constantly. So just to get a shot, a solid shot of, I don't know, 10 minutes where nothing would happen. You would just see the sea moving or, you know, nothing else. It's almost impossible. And that's the largest window. And that is very interesting, the chimney. He decided to take out, you know, to cut a hole into the wall, so from the outside, when you lit a fire, also at night time, it would shine into the nature. Just a brief, that's another work I've done after my very first visit to Barcelona, where I've seen the Mies van der Rohe, the pavilion, the Barcelona Pavilion. And that is one of those architectural devices for a video projection. So here, this is like a mirror. This is black glass, which is then being reflected. This is also black glass, where the projection, it's a guy just, you know, inscribing a circle. it's projected over a corner. This again is like a fake concrete wall, and it's like a wooden pallet, which usually I use like a plinth, like a socle. So that was one of the very kind of architectural devices. This one here is made out of cardboard, for instance, and a photographic print with a projection on it. That was one of the first studies. And I happened to be in Barcelona, and I wanted to go back to the pavilion to visit it, because I think it's so magnificent and so finished. I mean, I don't know whether you've been and whether you experienced those angles and reflections. It's absolutely mind-blowing. I thought, why continuing to build actually those sculptures? I just take the whole pavilion and establish a dialogue between those two buildings, right? I project Casa Malaparte actually into the pavilion. So this is a study. I don't know whether you can see. I just put in a still. So I want to have this wall with a reflection then on the water, and I think the whole water bassin, it's a moving reflection. I think it's such a clever thing he's done. It's extraordinary. So I'm keen to see. Can you see that? That's the window. I'm sorry, the projector's such bad quality. You don't really see the image. So I want to project onto the glass here. That's from the inside. Another one. So this will actually take place in May. If you happen to be in Barcelona in May, I think it's supposed to open around the 10th or the 11th of May. So right now we're working out all the technical equipment for it. And when I was doing research on Mies van der Rohe, I came across these drawings. These are drawings he did himself. And I found out that he reserved the rights actually for something like kind of huge photo prints he would include within the building, or like a painting. So there's a certain kind of closeness to my idea of having actually a projection, a moving image within of one of his buildings. Here's another one, you see. And what I actually went to New York, to MoMA, and I could access to their storage, where I could see all the original. And while I was talking to that curator, it was quite interesting because he outlined it's all like in a horizontal way. He always visioned perfectly what he wanted in a horizontal. It's always just one layer. As Corbusier, for instance, he would kind of, and Corbusier is also like a sculptor, he always made drawings kind of more three-dimensional, different floors. But Mies van der Rohe is always just on the horizontal. Here's like more drawings where you kind of see this kind of idea of a painting, right? So we tried it at night time as well, while we were at Casa Malaparte, but here I built a model where I would project actually, the nudes descending the staircase onto the curved wall. So again, I use also Casa Malaparte as a, projection device. Another study like that. And then I have to kind of work out a plan after I've done, the piece at Mies van der Rohe. That's it. What else can I do? I don't own the pavilion. I'm happy to move in there for 6 weeks, but that's it. So I got those sheets of glass and I applied the concrete onto it and I project onto it. So this is like a smaller model in my studio, but you can buy like very, very large sheets actually. So you would have kind of, this architectural device made out of glass with a projection. So it's kind of a way for me to shift the work into other museums, for instance, or within like another context. So depending on a given space, I could set up this device within a space where I would project onto it. Something like that. And that's the idea to do with the windows. So I would measure, like, to replace the windows in actual size, to project them back onto those huge panes of glass. Yeah. I used to study here at Chelsea, and I remember my tutor, Maria, she was lovely, and she gave us this letter by Solevit. Solevit wrote this letter to Eva Hesse, and I thought, now it's my first time I'm back in London, actually, and I wanted to give you that as well. And maybe it has an impact on somebody. So I find myself here like at the Architectural Association in the context of architecture, but my background is sculpture, really. Maybe I wanted to give you many images of the work, so instead of just keeping talking about it, I think you get an idea where it started and the layering. And I think, and I hope that this might trigger as well your kind of, experiment or examination, or like with Forsythe when he would shift the whole space, right? And the whole perception would shift all of a sudden. I think it bears like so much potential, which I think just touching upon just vaguely. I don't know in terms of architecture what's, I'm aware I'm actually going back into the past because Casa Malaparte and the Mies van der Rohe Pavilion are like both around like the 1930s or 40s, and they're huge icons of architecture. It wasn't my intention at all. It just happened that I found out about this portrait and to mix those two. But I think it's sneaking in through the back door, which is art or installation in my, case, to establish this dialogue between those two buildings, mixing them actually. And now what's also happening right now in this whole dialogue is I started to, because Godard, Sole Godard, he also knew Michelangelo Antonioni, and Antonioni is a filmmaker, he created that notion, the architecture of vision. So his kind of choreography of a film shot is extraordinary. So I looked at his films, and that's kind of what, that this also has very much like a painting-like quality, right? And Antonioni, again, knew Mark Rothko. So it's a small world. But that's what I'm right now, what I'm doing right now, that's what I'm examining at the moment. I don't know where it's going to take me to, but all of a sudden I find myself not making videos anymore, but I'm using film footage, given film footage, which I'm dismantling again. I'm taking slides, I'm taking frame by frame and look at each frame and how it, would shift. There's a corner, right? It's eclipse. Beautiful. I mean, oof. Just so you have an idea, I'm not so sure, and I'm diving into this experiment as well. So, here we go. All right. Actually, if you want to, I have this book here. You can also take a look. It's got more what you're interested in, kind of architectural drawings and plans, and it's one of those very few books that has all information, so you can, just take a look if you want to. And also have some more text, and I have a catalog here, so just come up later if you want, and we can take a look at it. Yeah. And now it's this moment. Ooh, can I ask you a question? No.
I wanted to ask you what made you choose the particular two buildings. You said that the Casa Malaparte was the idea of the unfinished portrait,
Yeah.
which makes sense, but what made you want to project that building onto Barcelona Pavilion, if you had a particular reason for doing that, or whether you were hoping to, I don't know, their juxtaposition to kind of create some, I don't know, critical discussion about it.
I'm touching a very sensitive issue here, because like I said before, it's two huge icons of modern architecture that I'm combining actually, right? But the way it really happened is that I was in Barcelona and I had a show with my gallery there, and I wanted to go back, and I was in the hotel drinking coffee, and I was kind of, oh my God. Of course, I just had the idea that I don't establish a setup, I don't build a sculpture for the projection, but that I use the pavilion, because I used it in sculptures similar. It had a huge impact on my work. And so to neglect actually the idea to build a setup, but use the whole building as such, and really regard it as a piece of sculpture. Right?
I'm very intrigued that in the Bill Forsythe work, where he's sort of struggling inside that sort of diagram, you have, as it were, a body removed from architecture, roughly. You can't see any orthogonal rectangular frames and so on. And in your work on the Malaparte, you removed the body from the architecture, because you obliterated them. And so that you seem to be caught in some sort of positive, negative sort of struggle or something. I'm very vaguely reminded of a 60s or 70s German performance artist named Klaus Rinker, who did a whole lot of Muybridge-like video stills of him struggling around inside a space. But it's your equivocation between the body and its surrounding that interests me.
Well, you say the body and there's the figure. I think there's a difference. I'm not interested in the body, I think. It's the figure, it's the moving figure in space. And its impossibility to reach it. Eventually I thought I'm making all these different works, gathering around the figure. They're all touching upon that subject because I'm unable to do the figure. I was casting the figure, I was drawing the figure, all that's been around, but it's a big question and I don't know how to approach the figure. I just don't. And they're all like these experiments, but the number of the experiments, I think they kind of give you an idea of what the figure is. I don't know. That's what I'm trying to do. I want to make a third portrait where I work with an actor. But it's kind of put on hold. I met John Malkovich and I was quite disappointed actually what the camera usually does, and I need somebody who's cross-eyed. And so, no, I don't know. So that's a parallel track where I work towards the third portrait as well, right? While I'm still doing this here, just to give you an idea. But you're very right. It's all about the figure, and that's Forsythe, for instance. How what the CD-ROM does, explain to a certain extent, his choreography at all different levels and how much you can reach into it and examine, it's wonderful. It's so enriching, actually. It's amazing. It's really, really amazing. And he was working with Daniel Liebeskind as well. So he's, another candidate who's not just thinking choreography or just dance. It's very experimental, and he's taking a lot of detours to arrive what he's doing.
But there's something in your question that I don't think you've addressed. Am I right? Can you help me with that answer? Which has, well, you've got the ready-made walls in the Barcelona Pavilion, whereas the concrete false walls, as you call them, were, as it were, elaborated from in relation to the figure, very, very closely in relation to the figure. In a sense, I want to ask, what is the figure in the Barcelona Pavilion?
Oh. Well, I haven't shown you, but I shot the sequence. It's deriving from Duchamp, and I mean, you have the staircase, and it's so much inviting. I think the staircase is like a section from an amphitheater, right? The staircase. So if you take that section, and you could make a full circle, so you actually end up in a theater with no visitors. That's the kind of staircase, flight of staircase. And I had a dancer at the house as well, and we were like trying all different experiments about the nude descending the staircase. So actually I have her walking backwards down the stairs, but then I reverse the video and then she walks upwards in a really awkward way, but you don't see the body, I just have the feet and that's it. I think just the fragment of the body actually contemplates the rest instead of showing the whole figure per se. It doesn't work. So I'll be just having, the extract of the legs in this really awkward way walking up the stairs, and that is something I will also project into the pavilion, and that's the only time you will actually see the figure. Otherwise, it's not there.
Was it because, sorry, Mike, okay. Was it because in the Barcelona Pavilion there is that figure inserted?
Yeah.
There's the sculpture, the Colbert figure.
Colbert, yeah.
And I can never decide whether it really should be there or not. And the fact that it's in the end hovering on the water suggests that it's in some kind of undecided state.
You're right, and if you look at all the studies that Mies van der Rohe did, how he incorporated sculpture was also by Wilhelm Lehmbruck. He had Wilhelm Lehmbruck, many works by Lehmbruck, and Kolbe. How can I answer that? I think it was also his attempt to break maybe that kind of space with the figure. It's very, 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 very difficult and not succeeding, I think, either. But it's like an alien actually within this whole construction and within all this perfectness actually. It's something like that doesn't fit there. I think it's kind of making that point of this fit, or I don't know what the word is, right? Do you know anything more about that? Yeah. Oh.
Could I just try to, and sort of like maybe, I think, approach the issue like that Brian maybe is asking about. I mean, one thing that was very clear, you sort of reproduced your own original irritation in showing the kind of trapezoidal staircase at Malaparte, that you wanted to get the figures out, and like you could see you still wanted to. And it was as if this kind of responded to some internal sense that whatever the staircase was, you certainly didn't want it to be the ground for those figures. And so, as it were, by removing the figures, then the staircase can be the figure. And to some extent, I think that was sort of like taken up in the end with the stills that you'd selected from the Antonioni, where, in a sense, the composition of the shot is such that it's not the case. I mean, there's no decision as to between figure and ground. You have a sort of a composite as between the sky and the architecture. In some sense, it's like a more kind of definite integrated composition. So it seems to me that there's something kind of happens that either you want to make a figure, as it were, which might have been a ground. And it reminds me, in respect to the Bacon, that, I mean, Deleuze has a sort of passage to describe Bacon as wanting a sort of figure, but without a ground. I mean, it's the time when he actually compares Bacon to Michelangelo in that context.
But he was staging, I think, the figure ever so often, Bacon.
Yes.
Or he constructed those cages. There was one point where I actually scanned in with an architect friend, and what's the name of AutoCAD or something like that? The system. We scanned in a catalogue of one of those Bacon cages, so we could look at them in a three-dimensional way, and I reconstructed one of those cages, because spatially sometimes they're impossible. They're just drawn out like that. But getting back to the figure and the Barcelona Pavilion, I think it's almost like a cliche, but there's also you as the viewer. I think it's stronger not to actually show the figure, but the absence of the figure is stronger than just representing the figure. So I think I give the setup for the figure, but not showing it per se. Or if I do, then in a very fragmented way, really and reversed the movement and turning it upside down, or all different ways. But it's my uncertainty, like you said, but in this experimental way.
Did it occur to you that between the Barcelona Pavilion and the Malaparte House, it might be possible to posit a sort of masculine, feminine relation, in as much as the Malaparte House is absolutely an insertion into that place, and the open plan in the Barcelona Pavilion could be regarded as being in some sense feminine in relation to that. But I don't know whether that...
Well, not sure. I think what I said about the house, he says it's a house like me, casa con me, and it's very harsh. I don't think it's feminine at all. It might be Brigitte Bardot that gave you the idea.
No, I'm saying the opposite.
You mean like the
Yeah, it's the Malaparte which is masculine.
Yeah, very extreme, and like you said, it's an escape into the prison. And he actually put up bars and everything, and to recreate that sort of atmosphere. I don't know what was the word you mentioned? I insert? No,
Well, I suggested that the Malaparte was inserted onto that site.
Yeah.
It's
I think
completely positive figure
doing
against it.
this, taking Casa Malaparte and projecting it within the Barcelona Pavilion, it's quite an, intrusive act, I think. And I've been asked as well, why do you have to do this? Because the pavilion itself is so finished, it doesn't require anything else. But it's this experimental setup. I don't know how it's going to look like, and I'm more than scared doing this. Have it all in my head, and you kind of, imagine it, and you have it in front of your inner eye, and what you want to do, but then reality tells you, it always turns out completely different. So it's quite a tense situation for me as well, especially because I'm also touching on the architectural issue, which that's not my focus. It's, you know, it's a sculpture that I have, it's a portrait, and they're all elements, right, that I'm using.
Is it something to do with the question of what moves? With Bill Forsythe, you had those very fixed camera positions,
With the hand
looking
camera
down, and I mean, they're like X, Y, and Z positions on a three-dimensional graph, and he's moving. And in the filming of places like the Barcelona Pavilion, the open plan always seems to invite a kind of wandering camera. And in that kind of space has become now the kind of cliche of a sort of fly-through movement with a kind of steady cam. And so I don't know, I mean, are you using motion with the camera, or are you using fixed
I'm using
viewpoint?
motion with the staircase. Yeah, I'm sorry you haven't seen those extracts, like of the footage I want to show. I decided not to show them because I'm not certain yet how this is all going to look like. But I also filmed like a 360-degree angle on top of the roof where I filmed the wall and I filmed the whole landscape. And it just goes round and round and round. And what I want to do is to have two images out of sync. So one starts earlier, one starts later. And then you just have this ongoing, that would be a movement, right? It's just a sheer documentation, right, of the surrounding and the white wall. And the staircase. And the windows, no, they don't move at all, it's still. And the blurred video, the horizon, well, you have the movement. We used lenses, so the focus is actually, you know, the depth in space where you get the focus far in the sea, you get the sky, then you get the house. So it's in and out. So that's the only movement, really.
Hello. Would you tell us a little bit more about the working kind of relationship with the Forsythe himself, how the two minds evolved together, more of the process of working with Forsythe?
With William Forsythe? First of all, it was watching many performances. I think he was performing a lot in London before, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of his pieces. And then you have the same experience that I have. How can you possibly describe what's been going on? It's just too much, right? How would you summarize it or describe it? So I went to many rehearsals, and I went to see him wherever I could. And then I approached him and I said, look, Bill, I really want to do this 5-channel video installation with you, which is just a pure experiment. And he said, great, let's try it. And he was keen to experiment, like just for a whole weekend, which is luxury because he's traveling so much. So we spent a weekend trying to figure out what we're going to do, and also with the cameras, because you know you have to coordinate it actually. When you're in that position, you're aware everything you do is being recorded, and you get really close, you know, and then you have that, and you can't, you know.
Were you in dialogue with each other when
Yeah.
he was moving and?
I didn't, well, I gave him the structure, I said what I want, and then he was doing it. He said, you know, you can give me directions, you know, do this, do that, do that. The only thing I wanted at the far end, I wanted him to crush it. So he's actually crushing down on the floor, and he's saying stop. And then it starts again. I decided to show the installation in normal speed and slow it down to 50% as well. So when you stand within those 5 screens, it has a really hypnotic kind of effect on people. Some people spend like an hour and a half, right, just observing how those, 2 or 3 images would, interfere, and then how it's kind of set together. And there I became aware that in that respect video is working, because I just use it as a tool, but not as a media because I like it. So it's a different starting point. And that spatial aspect, I mean, if you look at, he was working with Laban, right? And you have all these structures given. It's quite mathematical, actually, and how the body actually has to fit that system, and it's quite exaggerated. Those traditional ballet movements, and he's questioning that and really kind of just crushing it completely and reversing it. So he's doing the same. And I think we met on this experimental aspect. And interestingly enough, sometimes you just don't know. We had Beckett for the Whenever on Know How On. We got invited by Toni Morrison to do the piece at the Louvre, so we had another writer, and then I find myself with Malaparte, right? I've got nothing to do with writing, but it's just a sheer coincidence that, this is always, a very starting point as well. But if you're interested, I can look it up for you. I can give you the website. What we've seen now on the CD-ROM, Forsythe, he just did this thing online. You can watch a work of his. Do you know about it? You can, they kind of all computer generated it. We call it the table dance. And you see all different layers and what comes into it, where they dismantle it and describe it perfectly. But if you know about it, it's okay.
Did you do something around 20 hours?
No. But it was just that she had the project at the Louvre, and she invited us to do the unfinished portrait piece there. So.
There's one at the back.
Hi. Going back to the topic about the figure, for the Barcelona project, you've been quoted as using a sculptural device, and it reminded me of a compositional device used by Matisse, whose attempt to forge the figure sought to create a dialogue between sculpture and paint, such as the one created between Madeleine 1 and his nude study in blue. I was just wondering if, like Matisse, your work also attempts to situate the ontology of the figure through somehow reconciling its movements between those found in spaces of flatness and those in three-dimensionality.
Well, I know Matisse, when he did those blue figures, he was almost dying, and he was really handicapped and stuck in bed, and that was the only way, he could give directions and have those cutouts and arrange the patterns into a figure. With painting, I'm not dealing a lot with, not my subject, frankly speaking. Yeah. Yes.
Yes, for the recording.
So, no, I was just basically wondering if there was an attempt to, because you were talking about finding the figure.
Yes.
I was just trying to wonder if maybe you were trying to forge it by reconciling the flatness of the drawings that were taken, such as the Bacon one and the one in the pavilion which you had set up, the flatness of that surface, and the particular movements that can be found in flat objects and flat screens, compared to the objects and movements of the figure that can be found in three-dimensional space.
Well, if you look at it like that, I'm taking two buildings and I put them into each other. So, from a sculptural point of view, if you look at it as video, I mean, video is flat, and video is horrific actually. And it does require to crash it as well, what, for instance, Forsythe is doing with the movement and all that. And it is an attempt. I mean, it's an idea, you know, I'm trying to realize and fulfill. Whether it's going to work, I just don't know yet. And I can tell you in May, and that's really, I kind of have to, you know, get through that as well. But it's just an experiment. It might totally fail, which one also has to take into consideration. I'm not sure, but I hope it won't anyway.
That way, put the solar width quote there.
Yeah, I don't know. Oof. Yeah. I know. I brought this actually for you students because, like you know, my teacher in art history, she brought that in one day, and I was so struck by it, and I just loved it. And it told me kind of, you know, it doesn't help thinking about something, you have to do it. You know, nothing happens by thinking about it, and that's the experiment, you know. I mean, I never dreamt I would, you know, exhibit in the Louvre being alive, you know, it's just impossible. But, you know, it's amazing how far things take you. Also, like to get access to Malaparte, you know, it took me 3 years, and they asked for an extensive amount of money so I would be able to film there. And I said, look, I can't do this. I give you a piece of work, you know, or we see kind of where it takes us to. But I like this experiment, and I think that's the reason why I showed it, and maybe that's something you can take into your kind of world of thinking or working out structures, or I don't know. I participated the Biennale of Architecture just now with a project actually where we did a choreography and we built a stage, so you know it was like the viewer could walk up and everything was happening on this level, so we had people kind of standing like this, right? So not just to think in this one specific kind of direction, but you know, sandwich it, or you know, an experiment in all different directions. And that quote is very helpful for that, I think. Right. Hmm?
Anybody else want to say something or ask a question?
All right. But thank you very much for taking your time and listening. Thank you.